let's just give a little lay of the land. For everybody who has not been paying attention, who hasn't been tracking the pro days, who hasn't been tracking the pre-draft visits, there have been plenty of them. We'll start with the pro days, okay? They have been to everybody, and they've sent somebody here, somebody there, at pretty much everybody's outside of like Illinois. Northern Illinois, if you go through like I keep a track. It's like a Google sheet. This is where the Steelers sent this person. This is what I'm hearing about this. There's like one school on there that is nobody, and it's like Northern Illinois. And that's the only school where it's like the Steelers just decided we're good. We don't need anybody from Northern Illinois. Where they have sent, I think, some pretty important people. Obviously, you start with offensive line coach Pat Meyer because everybody's talking about, the offensive line, the center and offensive tackle. They sent Pat Meyer out west to Oregon's pro day, where obviously Jackson Powers Johnson's going to be. Pat Meyer's not looking at Bo Nix, but Bo Nix is out there as well. But looking at those guys, they also sent them to Oregon State's, where I'm going to get this name wrong, but Fuaga is out there. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his first name. Offensive tackle, some are saying that he might play guard. He's set to come in for a pre-draft visit. I think that's very significant. Zach Azzanni, Steelers' new wide receivers coach, went down to Texas, where he met extensively with Xavier Worthy, according to Tony Pauline. Took him out to dinner. That's a Mike Tomlin, Omar Khan tradition. Zach Azzanni's jumping on board. He's saying, I'll take some guys out to dinner. We'll have a good time. We'll learn about the fastest man alive. The fastest man in the NFL, Xavier Worthy, spent a lot of time with Zach Azzanni and the Pittsburgh Steelers crew down in Texas. And then the big two, Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin, they don't go everywhere, but where they do go is always significant. Georgia, Alabama, and Clemson. And you say, oh, that's pretty, that's normal. That's where the Pittsburgh Steelers would typically go. You have to understand that Alabama's pro day was also the same day as Ohio State's and Texas's pro day. I don't know who came up with that schedule, but that is as bad of a schedule as it can possibly get. The fact that they went to Alabama's, I think, is significant because Alabama's got some names. Kool-Aid McKinstry is the big one that stands out, obviously. But to go down there and then Clemson, that's not a surprise. Clemson is, that's like Mike Tomlin's Christmas. Everybody goes about, you go over to the UK or something, they tell you, every year we go on holiday. You go to you go to Scranton, Pennsylvania. Every year they tell you, we're going to the Jersey Shore. That's the vacation, the Jersey Shore. That's Mike Tomlin's Jersey Shore. He's going to the beach. He's going to Clemson. That's his vacation. And then Georgia, he probably hung out with his daughter. He's going to Georgia. There's no chance they weren't going to Georgia. The big ones. Those are the big names. Outside of that, they've been at pretty much every single pro day. When it comes to pre-draft visits, we'll lay the land, and then we'll dive into what a lot of this means, because I think a lot of it is telling us a little bit of something, and we'll dive into it, and then we'll answer a lot of questions as well. This is who the Pittsburgh Steelers have met with to this point, or have scheduled visits with up until this point. Washington running back Dylan Johnson, Florida State defensive tackle Braden Fisk, Northern Iowa defensive tackle Christian Boyd, a sleeper, loved that one. Missouri defensive lineman Darius Robinson, really loved that one. Georgia State offensive tackle Travis Glover, Florida wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, who we have been saying is a fit for the Pittsburgh Steelers and may be their pick in the third, maybe the fourth round. Western Kentucky wide receiver Malachi Corley, South Carolina wide receiver Xavier Legette, and then Oregon State's Fuaga, who I will learn how to say his last name, but for right now, I like it. All right, what does this say? What does all this say? Because you're sitting around thinking, okay, the Pittsburgh Steelers have gone to a bunch of pro days. They've hosted their guys. I could say this. We'll start with Oregon and Oregon State. To send Pat Meyer out west is pretty significant because the Pittsburgh Steelers don't go to Oregon pro days. They don't go to USC pro days. They're not a West Coast team. They have a West Coast scout, but every year I talk to this West Coast scout, or somebody talks to this West Coast scout, because he's been in the building forever and he's got a lot of fans, or a lot of friends, a lot of fans. People know who this guy is. Every year you hear stories about, this guy loves him. He loves him. He loves him. He loves him. The Steelers never draft him. They never go out and they get the West Coast kid. This year with Jackson Powers Johnson, and then to bring in Fuaga, I think is significant. I think to that point, you're looking at it and going, the Pittsburgh Steelers have some real interest in these two. How high that interest is, who knows? But to send Pat Meyer over there, that's significant. To not send Mike Tomlin and Omar Khan doesn't surprise me at all, because you have to look at it and go, there's no reason to send the whole crew over there. You're not sending the whole brass to Oregon. At the same time, they were negotiating with Russell Wilson, trying to figure out the Kenny Pickett nonsense, the Justin Fields nonsense. They had their hands full. There's no reason to go over there to scout a center and then an offensive tackle. You could send your offensive line coach over there and you feel just as good as if Mike Tomlin and company were hanging out and going over to Oregon. But I think that interest is real. I think that Jackson Powers Johnson is most certainly a name to watch. The fact that, they were kind of sleeping on centers at the NFL draft. Didn't meet with the guys that I thought they were going to meet with. Didn't meet with Jackson Powers Johnson. Didn't meet with Zach Frazier. They're bringing in Zach Frazier reportedly for a pre-draft visit. I don't know when that date is. I haven't been told the date, but I've been told that he's on the list. At some point, he's on the list. I think those two are significant. It kind of shows you that the Pittsburgh Steelers do have a lot of interest at center, and the fact that they haven't pursued a center, I think, tells you more than anything else. When it comes to Fuaga, I think what's interesting there is he's a natural right tackle, but some people are saying he might move to guard. And I don't know where that fits, because if you move to guard, I mean, you got two guards. You got James Daniels and you got Isaac Seumalo. Omar Khan didn't sound totally sold that James Daniels moving to center this season was a move that they were very open to make. So you'd have to think that Fuaga is looked at as a right tackle. Are you willing to take a shot on a guy that people believe is going to play guard in the NFL to play tackle? I think that's a big question. But I think those two are certainly on the Steelers' radar. I think Fuaga is very interesting. The fact that they're going to double dip and make sure that they get a really good look at him. He might be there at 51. He might be the guy that slides. I don't know how this. People are talking about Armarius Mims going anywhere from like 11 to 25. So if he's got that width, that will depend where the rest of these guys fall. Fuaga could make his way down. I see people talking about he might not be there at 20. I mean, everywhere I look, he's a second round pick. And I get it that he's going to move up and that there's a lot of, I don't know, second round pick from the scouts. This is all from the scouts. I don't read the PFF and that kind of stuff. I try to avoid as many mock drafts as humanly possible because a lot of times they're very iffy. This is what I'm hearing. And then Zach Azzani going to Texas, I think is huge because to meet with Xavier Worthy, massive. But then there's Tomlin and there's Omar Khan. And I think this is where it all shines. I think right now, if I had to predict, and tell me if I'm wrong here, Armarius Mims and Kool-Aid McKinstry, if I had to guess, are probably sitting 1A, 1B on the Pittsburgh Steelers draft charts. And I just don't think that the Steelers are going to look. I think if the Steelers have their choice between those two, they're going to look at Kool-Aid, who ran, I believe, a 4.41 or something like that with a Liz Frank sprain in his foot, or Jones fracture in his foot, which is massive to be able to do that. And he's supposed to be good by training camp. And then Armarius Mims dealing with the hamstring injury. You're very concerned about his durability, but the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to overlook that if his medicals come back good with them. And they're going to look at him as just a massive human being who's a natural right tackle. That is so significant. The Steelers are spending a lot of time looking at natural right tackles. I don't know if they're, you talk about guys like J.C. Latham, who's a right tackle. You talk about guys like Armarius Mims, who's a right tackle. And then you talk about the guys who, like Joe Alt. Joe Alt's a big one. Everybody, Joe Alt's the first guy off the board. The Steelers could trade up for Joe Alt. Joe Alt's a left tackle, and at that point, you're making Broderick Jones a right tackle, and concerning. Am I wrong to say I think Kool-Aid and Armarius Mims are 1A, 1B on their draft board right now?
Not at all. No, you're 100% spot on that, especially because you mentioned that Mike Tomlin loves to go to Clemson. Mike Tomlin loves to draft, especially over the last couple of years, Georgia Bulldogs. I mean, the Georgia to Pennsylvania connection, not just Pittsburgh, but Philadelphia, it runs very deep. So
True.
We've seen 3 or 4 names from the Georgia Bulldogs that have been closely connected to the Steelers. And for Armarius Mims, a guy that you mocked to the Steelers in your first mock draft, to be somebody they're still interested in at this stage is not surprising in the least.
Dude, I had him going both. I had him Armarius Mims, first round pick. I had him trading up to get Kool-Aid with their second round pick right in the beginning of the second round. I think Kool-Aid might have ran himself out of the second round. I think to run whatever he ran, a 4.41, 4.47, whatever it was, I think right there, he looked so good that people are going to be like, this dude's a stud. There were issues with, like, people want to compare him to Joey Porter Jr. and say, oh, he's a lengthy, physical guy, but, the production's there, but he was the number 2 in Alabama, which I guess that's not a comparison to Joey Porter Jr. Joey Porter Jr. was the number 1 at Penn State, but they want to compare him and say, oh, well, Terrion Arnold, That's the dude. Nate Wiggins might be better than him. Obviously, you got Quinion Mitchell, who's probably going to be the first corner off the board. The Steelers didn't even look at him. They didn't even go to his pro day. I was told he was their number one guy, and they somehow along the way very quickly realized this dude's never going to make it to 20. It's not going to happen.